এই সাদা নাই কে আনবে কি রসুন পেঁয়াজ কত নাই হবে পেঁয়াজের তো দাম রসুন পেঁয়াজ কাঁ 10 টাকা পড়ে
যুবৰাজ এটো আইডি মিউট কৰি দিয়াচোন
ওকে মোৰ হেৰিটো নাই দিয়া নেকি মানে কহষ্টৰ হেৰিটো নাই দিয়া নেকি সেইটো কাৰণে নাই হোৱা
পৱন চাই পাৰিব
হেৰি মই
মিউট কৰি দিব
কোন আছিল স্যামসাঙৰ এইটো কৰিব লাগে ন
মিউট কৰক স্যাৰ স্যামসাংটো
কৰিলো বাকীখিনি ঠিকে আছে মিউটে আছে যুবৰাজ ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰি দিয়া নেকি
হয় হয়
হা ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰি দিয়া জয়েন কৰিলে কৰি থাকিব তেওঁলোকে
হয় কৰি আছো I hope I am audible and visible to you. Sir.
Yes, Zubarath, you can continue.
Namaskar. Honorable Principal of Gorgaon College, Dr. Hoibokasi Mohanto, respected resource person of today's webinar, Dr. Rimon Bhuya Gogoi, Assistant Professor, Dibrugarh University, respected Vice Principal of Gorgaon College, Dr. Rina Khondikoi, respected HOD, Department of Political Science, Gorgaon College, Dr. Pawan Kumar Gogoi, respected IQAC Coordinator, Gorgaon College, Dr. Purojit Hoikia, respected faculty members of Department of Political Science, Sonari College, esteemed colleagues, respected participants, and my dear students. A warm good evening to you all. As you all know, today is 10 December, which is celebrated as International Human Rights Day all over the world. So to commemorate this August event, a webinar has been organized jointly by Department of Political Science, Gorgaon College, in collaboration with IQAC, Gorgaon College, and Department of Political Science, Sonari College. So, first of all, I request Honorable Principal of Gorgaon College, Dr. Hoibokasi Mohanto, sir, to deliver his welcome address. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jubaraj Gogoi. A very good evening to you all. Shubho Sandhya. Azir অনুষ্ঠানত উপস্থিত ডক্টৰ ৰীনা খন্দিকৈ বাইদেউ গড়গাঁও মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ সন্মানীয় উপাধ্যক্ষ ডক্টৰ পৱন কুমাৰ গগৈ বিভাগীয় প্ৰধান ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগ গড়গাঁও কলেজ আৰু সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ বিভাগীয় প্ৰধানকে প্ৰমুখ্য কৰি অধ্যাপক অধ্যাপিকা তথা ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকল আজিৰ অনুষ্ঠানৰ সমল ব্যক্তি ডিব্ৰুগড় বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ সহকাৰী অধ্যাপক ডক্টৰ ৰিমন ভূঞা গগৈ ডাঙৰীয়ানী আমাৰ এই ৱেবিনাৰখনত অংশগ্ৰহণ কৰা আৰু কোলাবৰেট কৰা গড়গাঁও মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ IQAC কোঅৰ্ডিনেটৰ ডক্টৰ সুৰজিত শইকীয়া আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ সন্মানীয় অধ্যাপক অধ্যাপিকাসকল, সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ সন্মানীয় অধ্যাপক অধ্যাপিকাসকল, শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ অংশগ্ৰহণকাৰীসকল আৰু মৰমৰ ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকল, আজি 10 ডিচেম্বৰ আমি সকলোৱে জানো আজি বিশ্ব মানৱ অধিকাৰ দিৱস, ৱৰ্ল্ড হিউমেন ৰাইটছ ডে। আৰু এই দিৱসটোৰ যি তাৎপৰ্য, the significance of the day that has already been mentioned by Professor Juboraj Gogoi, আৰু আমি মানৱ অধিকাৰ সম্পৰ্কে আমাৰ এটা সম্যক ধাৰণা আছে আৰু বৰ্তমান সময়ত সাম্প্ৰতিক সময়ত সমগ্ৰ বিশ্বতে শৈক্ষিক, ৰাজনৈতিক, সামাজিক তথা আন্তঃৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় প্ৰেক্ষাপটৰ এটা আটাইতকৈ বহুল চৰ্চিত আলোচিত বিষয় হৈছে মানৱ অধিকাৰ। আৰু আমি সকলোৱে জানো হিউমেন ৰাইটছ বা মানৱ অধিকাৰ, মানুহৰ অধিকাৰ, মানুহে জন্মগতভাৱে নেচাৰেলি স্বভাৱসিদ্ধভাৱে জন্মগতভাৱে বাই বাৰ্থ কিছুমান ৰাইট বা কিছুমান অধিকাৰ তেওঁলোকে ভোগ কৰে। সেই অধিকাৰবোৰকে আমি মানৱ অধিকাৰ বুলি কওঁ। যদিও মানৱ অধিকাৰৰ ধাৰণাটো তুলনামূলকভাৱে নতুন বুলি কোৱা হয়, আচলতে মানৱ অধিকাৰৰ ধাৰণা মানৱ সভ্যতাৰ বিকাশৰ পৰাই আৰম্ভ হৈছে। আৰু যদিও আমি এটা এই ধাৰণাটো মূলতঃ it's connected, related with the, we can trace it with the law of natural law. আমি প্ৰাকৃতিক অধিকাৰ তত্ত্বৰ সৈতে এই মানৱ অধিকাৰ আমি ক'ব পাৰো। মানে therefore মানৱ অধিকাৰ is commonly understood as natural and inherent rights, inalienable rights. These rights are inherent in our nature and without which we cannot live as human being. যিবিলাক অধিকাৰ নহলে আমি মানুহ হিচাপে মৰ্যাদা সহকাৰে জীয়াই থাকিব নোৱাৰো, যিবিলাক অধিকাৰ নহলে মানুহৰ ব্যক্তিত্বৰ পূৰ্ণ বিকাশ হ'ব নোৱাৰে, সেইবিলাক অধিকাৰকে আমি সাধাৰণ অৰ্থত মানৱ অধিকাৰ বুলি কওঁ। আজি মানৱ অধিকাৰ সম্পৰ্কত হিউমেন ৰাইটছ, ইটছ ৰেলিভেন্স এণ্ড ইন্ট্ৰিকেচিজ এই সন্দৰ্ভত বক্তব্য প্ৰদান কৰিব আমাৰ ডিব্ৰুগড় বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ অধ্যাপক ডক্টৰ ৰিমন ভূঞা গগৈয়ে। তেখেতে বিশেষকৈ এই দিশবিলাকত আলোকপাত কৰিব। আৰু যদিও আমি ৰাষ্ট্ৰসংঘ গঠন হোৱাৰে পৰা since 1945 24 অক্টোবৰ আমি এটা ইণ্টাৰনেশ্যনেল, এটা আন্তঃৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় ৰূপ পালে মানৱ অধিকাৰে, এটা সাৰ্বজনীন চৰিত্ৰ পালে, ৰূপ পালে, ষ্টিল আমি বিভিন্ন কথাত আমি কিছু আপেক্ষিকতাবাদ, আমি ৰিলেটিভ কিছুমান কথা দেখিবলৈ পাওঁ, যিটো কাৰণে আচলতে সমগ্ৰ বিশ্বতে প্ৰতিজন ব্যক্তিয়ে সমভাৱে মানৱ অধিকাৰ ভোগ কৰিব নোৱাৰে বা পৰা নাই। সেইকাৰণে কিছুমান ইন্ট্ৰিকেচিজ, কিছুমান জটিলতা নিশ্চয়কৈ আছে। আৰু I feel there is a huge gap between theory and practices. Our law আছে, we have international law, we have constitutions in every country, every nation, but every people, they cannot enjoy their human rights equally or universally. সেইকাৰণে কিছুমান ফেক্টৰছে ইয়াত ক্ৰিয়া কৰে, কিছুমান কাৰকে ইয়াত ক্ৰিয়া কৰে। এই কথাবিলাক আচলতে আমাৰ এতিয়াও চিন্তা চৰ্চা বিতৰ্ক চলি আছে। কিন্তু এটা কথা ঠিক যে মানৱ অধিকাৰৰ ধাৰণাই আচলতে সাম্প্ৰতিক সময়ত এটা বিকাশ লাভ কৰিছে। আৰু বিশেষকৈ দ্বিতীয় বিশ্বযুদ্ধৰ পিছত বা ৰাষ্ট্ৰসংঘ গঠন হোৱাৰ পিছৰে পৰা, যেতিয়াৰ পৰা গণতান্ত্ৰিক শাসন ব্যৱস্থা প্ৰত্যেকখন দেশতে প্ৰতিষ্ঠা হবলৈ ধৰিলে, এতিয়া গণতন্ত্ৰৰ মাপকাঠিও এতিয়া আমাৰ আচলতে হিউমেন ৰাইটছ বুলি ক'লে বহাই কোৱা নহয়। আমি এখন দেশৰ নাগৰিকে মানৱ অধিকাৰ কেনেদৰে ভোগ কৰে তাৰ ওপৰত আমি এখন দেশৰ গণতন্ত্ৰৰ সফলতা বা বিফলতা আমি আজিকালি সাম্প্ৰতিক সময়ত আমি নিৰূপণ কৰাৰ এটা আমাৰ মানসিকতা গঢ়ি উঠিছে। মানৱ অধিকাৰ সন্দৰ্ভত সজাগ হৈছে, সচেতন হৈছে আৰু মানৱ অধিকাৰ শিক্ষাৰো প্ৰচাৰ আৰু প্ৰসাৰ ঘটিছে। ৰাষ্ট্ৰসংঘই এই উদ্দেশ্যে আচলতে ৰাষ্ট্ৰসংঘই 1948 চনৰ 10 ডিচেম্বৰত ইউনিভাৰ্চেল ডিক্লেৰেশ্যন অফ হিউমেন ৰাইটছখন গৃহীত কৰিছিল। আৰু সেইকাৰণে 1950 চনৰ 10 ডিচেম্বৰৰ পৰা এই দিনটো ৰাষ্ট্ৰসংঘৰ উদ্যোগত সমগ্ৰ বিশ্বতে বিশ্ব মানৱ অধিকাৰ দিৱস বা ইণ্টাৰনেশ্যনেল হিউমেন ৰাইটছ ডে বা ৱৰ্ল্ড হিউমেন ৰাইটছ ডে হিচাপে পালন কৰি অহা হৈছে। এইবাৰ ৰাষ্ট্ৰসংঘই এই ডেটোৰ এই এইবাৰৰ মানৱ অধিকাৰ দিৱসৰ থিমটো নিৰ্ধাৰণ কৰিছে, মূল ভাৱ নিৰ্ধাৰণ কৰিছে, ফ্ৰীডম, ইকুৱেলিটি এণ্ড জাষ্টিচ ফৰ অল, সকলোৰে বাবে স্বতন্ত্ৰতা, সমতা আৰু ন্যায়। আমি এই দিশত যথেষ্ট আগবাঢ়িছো, কিন্তু এতিয়াও আচলতে আমি সঁচা অৰ্থত সকলোৰে মাজত সমতা, স্বতন্ত্ৰতা আৰু ন্যায়, বিশেষকৈ আমাৰ প্ৰিএম্বল অফ ইণ্ডিয়ান কনষ্টিটিউশ্যনত যিটো কথা লিখা হৈছে বা যিটো কথা কোৱা হৈছে, ছচিয়েল, পলিটিকেল এণ্ড ইকনমিক যিটো জাষ্টিচ, অৰ্থনৈতিক, সামাজিক আৰু ৰাজনৈতিক যি ন্যায়, সেই ন্যায় প্ৰতিষ্ঠা কিন্তু এতিয়াও প্ৰতিষ্ঠাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত আমি এতিয়াও 100% সফল হৈ উঠা নাই। সেইকাৰণে মই এটা কথা ব্যক্তিগতভাৱে অনুভৱ কৰোঁ, আমাৰ আন্তঃৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় আইন আছে, we have international laws, we have constitutions. Every constitutions they guarantee some basic rights, human rights, fundamental rights, some basic rights to their people. But in practice, every people exactly তেওঁলোকে যি আমাৰ আচলতে আইনত উল্লেখ আছে সেইমতে আমাৰ মানৱ অধিকাৰ ভোগ কৰিব পৰা নাই বা কৰিব পৰা নাই। কেতিয়াবা আমি গণতান্ত্ৰিক দেশ বুলি ক'লেও প্ৰত্যেকখন চৰকাৰৰ যি গণতান্ত্ৰিক চৰকাৰৰ যি এটা আমি অথৰিটেৰিয়ান কেৰেক্টাৰ প্ৰতিফলিত হোৱা দেখিবলৈ পাওঁ, ৰিফ্লেক্ট হোৱা দেখিবলৈ পাওঁ, তাতো আমাৰ বহু কথাত মানৱ অধিকাৰ খৰ্ব হয়। কিন্তু যিখিনি বেচিক মানৱ অধিকাৰ, ৰাইট টু লাইফ, ৰাইট টু লিবাৰ্টি, ৰাইট টু কনচাইন্স, এইখিনি বা right to freedom of speech and right to freedom of expression, religion, right to religion, এই অধিকাৰ বিলাক বহু পৰিমাণে প্ৰতিষ্ঠা হৈছে, কিন্তু বহু পৰিমাণে ইবিলাকৰ খৰ্বও বা ইয়াৰ যিটো আমাৰ ভংগ সেয়াও চলি আছে। সেইকাৰণে মানৱ অধিকাৰ বিষয়টোৰ তাৎপৰ্য যেনেদৰে আছে আৰু মানৱ অধিকাৰ সঁচা অৰ্থত প্ৰতিষ্ঠা, মানৱ অধিকাৰৰ সংৰক্ষণ আৰু সংবৰ্ধনৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত কিছু ইন্ট্ৰিকেচিছ বা জটিলতাও আছে। আমি আশা কৰিম আমাৰ যি সমল ব্যক্তি, আমাৰ যি ৰিচোৰ্চ পাৰ্চন ডক্টৰ ৰিমন ভূঞা গগৈ ডাঙৰীয়ানীৰ বক্তব্য, তেখেতৰ প্ৰেজেন্টেশ্যনে আজি আমাক উপকৃত কৰিব, ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকলক উপকৃত কৰিব আৰু মানৱ অধিকাৰৰ ধাৰণাক এবাৰ নতুন দৃষ্টিৰে, নতুন ধৰণেৰে এটা আমি মানে চোৱাৰ কাৰণে, এবাৰ জুমি চোৱাৰ কাৰণে আমাক এটা অৱকাশ আনি দিব। মই উদ্যোক্তাসকলৰ আন্তৰিক শলাগ লৈছো। ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগ গড়গাঁও কলেজ, IQAC গড়গাঁও কলেজ আৰু সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগে আমাৰ লগত সহযোগ কৰিছে। মই সেইবাবে তেখেতসকলৰ প্ৰতিও আন্তৰিক ধন্যবাদ আৰু কৃতজ্ঞতা জনাইছো আৰু আন্তৰিক ধন্যবাদ জনাইছো আজি আমাৰ সমল ব্যক্তি ডক্টৰ ৰিমন ভূঞা গগৈ ডাঙৰীয়ানীৰ প্ৰতি। তেখেতে আজি বন্ধৰ দিনটোতো আমাক সন্মতি প্ৰদান কৰিছে, সময় দিছে আৰু আমাক এক প্ৰেজেন্টেশ্যনেৰে আমাক উপকৃত কৰিবলৈ আগবাঢ়ি আহিছে। পুনৰবাৰ সকলোলৈকে ধন্যবাদ আৰু কৃতজ্ঞতা জ্ঞাপন কৰি আজিৰ অনুষ্ঠানটিৰ সামগ্ৰিক সফলতা কামনা কৰি আজিৰ এই ৱেবিনাৰখন উদ্বোধন কৰা হ'ল বুলি ঘোষণা কৰিছো। ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful welcome address and for pointing out the relevance of human rights and also pointing it out that there is a gap between theory and practice as far as the discourse of human rights is concerned. I also thank you for your words of encouragement. Now, before handing over the floor of the webinar to our resource person, Dr. Rimon Bhuya Gogoi, let me briefly introduce her to you. Dr. Rimon Bhuya Gogoi is an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University. She completed her graduation from Ramjas College, New Delhi. Then she did her MA, MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Her topic of PhD was Indigenous Peoples' Identity, Customary Laws and Capitalist Transformation, a case study of the Ravas and Tiwas of Assam. She completed her PhD under supervision of Professor Nivedita Menon. She has also participated in various national and international conferences and seminars. Apart from that, she has also published scholarly papers in various journals of national and international repute. Her areas of interest are political theory, political economy, capitalism, and indigeneity. Madam, it is really a pleasure and honor for us to have you on board. Now, without further delay, I hand over the session of the webinar to you. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuvarajda, for this very gracious introduction. Good evening to everyone present in this webinar. Good evening, Principal of Gurgaon College, Dr. Sabyasachi Mahanta, Vice Principal, Dr. Rina Khondikoi, other faculty members of Gurgaon College, of Hunari College, Department of Political Science, Hunari College, and everyone else present here today. And I thank you especially for having come on this Sunday evening to discuss human rights and the relevance and intricacies of it. Now, I want to begin this session with something very basic. So, human rights, and a very good introduction to what we shall discuss today, or what we should discuss surrounding human rights, has actually already been given today by Dr. Mahanta. And catching up from there, I would like to begin with understanding why this very concept of human right or institution of human rights came into our entire political agenda in both executive and academic terms. Manav Adhikar, human rights. So rights that we get or rights that we inhere as human beings. Ami kisu adhikar eibabe pao karon ami manav rupot ei prithibir janmo loisu. But the idea that these rights that we inhere as human beings had to be enshrined in a doctrine is very interesting. So ekhon doctrine ba eta declaration at kyo likhibologia hol? Likhibologia hol mane ei gutei adhikar samuhor damon hoise kane ei adhikar খিনি আমি assert কৰিবলগীয়া হৈছে. So this assertion of human rights as something that we must demand, something that we must get and have for ourselves, reflects a fundamental conflict in our human existence. Hey conflict to hoise, that conflict is between human beings, that is individuals and society. And this conflict between individual and groups, individuals and communities have existed for a very long time, for as long as human societies and civilizations have existed. Bhupen Hazarikai jetia likhe, byakti jodi byakti kendrik samasti jodi byaktitto rohit tene hithil samajok tabhang. Bhupen Hazarika was actually pointing towards this very conflict, that the individual and the society that is made up of those individuals, or the community or the groups that are made up of those people or those humans. Now, individual existence, individual meaning the I, the me, as we exist in this society, and the society as in us, ami hokolubor kane koi thaku. If we go back a little bit, and I don't spend too much time on that, but we go back a little bit in history, we began living as living beings. We began our lives as human beings, as hunter-gatherers. Our life was disjointed, disoriented, and we lived in individual pockets as individual beings. Actually, the consciousness of individuality also did not exist at that point in time. But gradually we evolved. Gradually we settled into agriculture, and we settled into one places. And the moment we got established with settled agriculture, we formed societies. He muhurtoi paraji homoyat ami ekota sthanot বাস কৰিবলৈ ধৰিলো নিগাজিকৈ তেতিয়াই সমাজৰ আৰম্ভণিও হয়. And over time, that society kept on changing its course, its shape, its form. আৰু সেই সমাজখনৰ আবিৰ্ভাৱৰ লগতেই কিন্তু এই ব্যক্তিত্ব আৰু সমাজ, ব্যক্তি আৰু সমাজৰ এই সংঘৰ্ষৰো আৰম্ভণি হয়. So this conflict between individual and rights. এতিয়া এটা মাৰ্ক্সেও সেইটো কথাই কৈছে যে all production is social production. যে আমি individual hisabe, we as individuals actually cannot exist or progress for a very long time. I mean, exist hoyto olop somoyer karone koribo paro, but we won't progress, we won't evolve, we won't develop. Our production becomes social production. Everything about us, our identity is social identity, our conceptions are social conceptions, our interests are social interests. So ami সমাজখন নোহোৱাকৈ থাকিব নোৱাৰো. That idea has been now almost widely accepted all through social science discourses. But this very society develops, evolves, and takes new forms. And over time, in different forms, it becomes totalitarian in nature. It becomes power oriented in nature. আৰু সেই সময়তেই এই ইণ্ডিভিজুৱেল আৰু societyৰ যিটো conflict, সেই conflictটোও এটা concrete shape লয়. The moment that conflict takes shape, that conflict takes a concrete form, then the necessity of demanding a certain space for ourselves also rises. The amak nizor babe eta jega lage. It is an ideological space maybe, but space where we can be ourselves apart from the society. So we have to have the society, yet we also needed some space from the society or the state. Now, society kon state keneko hol ba state or society mazor jitu categorical difference that is also very important. But for today's discussion, I would not go into that domain. But over time, this society evolved into political organizations. State, modern state or form নহলো কিছু নহয় কিছু ধৰণৰ political organizational ৰূপ এই সমাজখনে লয় আৰু ৰূপ লোৱাৰ লগে লগে কি আৰম্ভ হয় এটা concentration of power. Now, as the mode of production changed over time in history, our social structure and our political organizations also changed. And as the mode of production became more specialized, from primitive communism to slave society, from slave society to feudal society, from feudal society to capitalist, and so on, jenekoi amar production system to complexity bari goi thakil, tene dhoreni amar political aru social organization buroru complexity bari goi thakil. And in that complexity then rose a concentration of power in the hands of a few. That few took different shape. In fact, in feudal ages, power or sovereignty was extremely parcelized. Eta institutional sovereignty to concentrated nasile. But one class of people, especially during the monarchical rule, became extremely powerful, and their justification of that power, their justification of that authority came not from the people but came from above, jituk ami divine right বুলি কওঁ. So ভগৱানে দিয়া অধিকাৰ গতিকে মানুহৰ প্ৰতি তেওঁলোকৰ একো সেই ধৰণৰ কৰ্তব্য নাথাকে, because the license has been given by the one above. Therefore, the answerability also is towards the one above. So this is the time when monarchical rule grows very totalitarian in nature, and the idea that individuals can have an authority over their own lives, can have certain basic liberties that were supposed to be inherent for us, gradually declined. Aru lahe lahe rights or guti conception to amar political organizations or pora atobitoloi thorile. This is why Magna Carta of 1215 becomes very crucial or becomes very important. 1215 in 1215 the Magna Carta, a treaty was signed between King John and other barons of Britain. Magna Carta khone bikhek eku kora nai, political development or namot eku nokorile. It was an extremely elitist, it was patriarchal in nature, because women were not only excluded but women's rights were vehemently suppressed in that declaration. But Magna Carta marked an important development. Magna Carta etu development mark korile je stateor je authority, monarchy je raja hokolor je eta authority ase amar jibonor uporot ji koribo khoje koribo pora, ji dhoroner rules তেওঁলোকে বনাব খোজে সেইটো বনাব পৰাৰ যিটো অধিকাৰ, সেই অধিকাৰটো যে প্ৰশ্ন কৰিব পাৰি সেইটো মেগনা কাৰ্টাই স্থাপন কৰিছিলে. মেগনা কাৰ্টা established that the state is fallible, that the rights of monarchy is something that can be questioned, and that is why Magna Carta is important, not because of what it carries, but because of what it signifies. Now, once that idea was established, gradually, however, this change, people's involvement in the political political developments began to increase. Etia ami jodi aru olop agoloi golu heten we, and Dr. Monta has already highlighted this, how in the ancient civilizations this idea of concentration of power was not very inherent. And if we take our own civilizations, for example, or we take the Greek civilizations, for example, democratic governments did exist. Into a jitu overall in the political system developed after feudalism, that was, in fact, after slave society, that was more and more towards the concentration of power in the hands of the monarchy. Aru manuhor astitto to manuhor role to hei dhornar political organization or lahe lahe komi ahiboloi dhorile aru heitur Magna Carta prashna korile. In 1689, of course, a very extensive Bill of Rights after the revolution was signed, and it was during this time that a theory called social contract theory, and especially after Hobbes, it was Locke whose writings were becoming very not only popular but very influential in entire Europe. John Locke ki koisile? John Locke koisile je state kenekwa dharon, no matter what kind of state exists, all people have some inherent inalienable rights with them just because they are born as human beings. Manu rupe janma loar babe prakritik avasthate teoloke kisu odhikar, ami sokolue kisu odhikar pao. And that theory then became the theory of natural rights. Natural rights are rights that we do not get from the state. Natural rights are rights that we get in the state of nature itself. Prakritik rupote inherently, inalienably Locke writes, we get certain rights. He, of course, limited those rights to only 3 basic rights: right to life, right to liberty, and right to property. Aru teo ki manuhor ba kunkini manuhor he odhikarbur thakibo heituku bahut limit kori disle. It was basically propertied men of those societies that who were supposed to get those rights. But however, the idea that even beyond the state we get certain rights was in a way revolutionary for that time. Natural rights se John Locke aru eta important contribution korisile amar ei gutei rights or discourse to je jetiai ekhon government nijor jitu basic duty hetu fulfill koribo nware, that is protection of the people, then the people will have a legitimate right to go against that government. That was also an important benchmark in the development of the entire discourse of rights, and especially human rights for us. Ami state or porai right bu nolo, state jetia amar hei right puror right hei odhikar bur domon koribo, hei rajyokhonor biruddhe joaru amar eta odhikar thakib. Now, with John Locke, then few very fundamental ideas were established, though very limited. This was the time after Locke, after he was writing in 1690s, and by this time, a couple of decades later, American War of Independence was gaining momentum, and simultaneously, Rousseau was coming up with newer ideas of how rights are supposed to work. And in fact, Rousseau went even further than John Locke. Aru Rousseau kole je ami kebol he natural right bur loi he state khonat thakilei nohobo, boronso we have a right to go against any rule or law that we did not consent to. Teo koisile amar man is born free, yet we see him everywhere in chains. Ami mukta hoye janma long, kintu ami কিবা নহয় কিবা শিকলিৰে সদায় বান্ধ খাই থাকো, আৰু সেই শিকলিবোৰ হৈছিলে সামাজিক আৰু ৰাজনৈতিক for Rousseau. So Rousseau says that in order to break those chains, we must then go beyond those chains and create a new state altogether that he calls general will. আৰু general will হৈছে এনেকুৱা এখন ষ্টেটৰ এনেকুৱা এখন ৰাজ্যৰ কল্পনা, an imagination of a state where everyone will consent to and everyone will have a role in, and then that state will form. আৰু তাৰ জেনাৰেল উইল আৰু যদি আমাৰ ইণ্ডিভিজুৱেল উইলৰ লগত কিবা কনফ্লিক্ট আহে, and this is where this original conflict that I talked about, the conflict between individual and society becomes very crucial. Rousseau কয় যে যদি জেনাৰেল উইল আৰু আমাৰ ইণ্ডিভিজুৱেল লিবাৰ্টিৰ মাজত কিন্তু কনফ্লিক্ট হয়, then we must remember that general will has been formed with the greater ability, greater consent of the whole population together. তাৰ মানে এটা লাৰ্জাৰ গুডৰ কাৰণে জেনাৰেল উইল ফৰ্ম কৰা হৈছে, the general will has been formed for a larger good, and therefore its liberty must prevail over our individual liberty, which means by following the general will, we then become more freer than what we originally were. Now, Rousseau therefore is little complex to understand, because Rousseau not only sets us free, but Rousseau also forces us to be free. কিন্তু ৰুছোৰ লগত লাহে লাহে এই ইণ্ডিভিজুৱেল আৰু ছ'চাইটিৰ কনফ্লিক্টটোৱে কিন্তু এটা নতুন ৰূপ লয়. This conflict between individual and society takes a new form, and the direct political outcome of that we can see in the French Revolution of 1789 and the Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizens. তাৰপিছত এই সময়তে, and especially in the American context, Thomas Paine also becomes very important. পেইনে monarchyৰ বিৰুদ্ধে লিখিছিল, monarchyৰ বিৰুদ্ধে সদায় থিয় দিলে যে কিছু মানুহৰ হাতত বাকী সকলো মানুহৰ বাবে নিয়ম কানুন বনোৱাৰ অধিকাৰ কিয় থাকিব, মানুহৰ নিজৰ অধিকাৰ কিয় নাথাকিব, এই কথাকে থমাস পেইনে আজীৱন কৈ থাকিলে, for which he was also punished. He also had to flee his own state, but his saying that my country is the world and my religion is to do good has become an epitaph in American political scenario. Tarpisat সেই সময়তে 1776 American independence takes place, and a couple of decades later American Constitution is signed and the Bill of Rights is established. Tarupori aru philosophically sabole gole there have been other thinkers who have talked about this universal morality, like Immanuel Kant, who talks about universal morality to be the basis of how we act and how we make our societies. He advocated a republican form of government because that form of government is what takes us forward towards that universal morality, jot manuhor basic dignity hodai maintain kora hoy. But another interesting turn happens, that is in 20th century, however, this entire debate on rights as natural rights comes to be questioned. যে প্ৰকৃতি আমাক কেনেকৈ অধিকাৰ দিব, প্ৰাকৃতিক ৰূপত আমি কেনেকৈ অধিকাৰ দিম, অধিকাৰবোৰ যেতিয়া এটা স্পেচিফিক ইনষ্টিটিউচনৰ পৰা নাহে, এনফৰ্চিয়েবল নহয়, এনফৰ্চিয়েবল অথৰিটি নাথাকে, অধিকাৰে সঁচাকৈ অধিকাৰৰ ৰূপ ল'ব পাৰে নে? This was the question that was raised by utilitarian philosophy, most astoundedly, most clearly reflected in the writings of Bentham. Bentham likhisile je the real rights are always legal rights. A state has to establish a certain legal code. That legal code has to give us or ensure for us citizens certain rights. And only then, in that concrete setup, with who guarantees the rights, who protects those rights, who enforces those rights, is very clearly outlined, is the only form of real right. So utilitarian philosophy would say that natural right is very vague and very abstract in nature, and as long as rights are abstract, tar eko concrete base na thake, rights cannot be actually exercised or demanded or even enforced. So utilitarian philosophy gave a new turn to the entire discourse of rights, making legality or law the basis of rights rather than nature or the inherent dignity of human beings. So আজি যেতিয়া আমি human rights ৰ কথা পাতো, আকৌ যেতিয়া আমি মানৱ অধিকাৰৰ কথালৈ আহো, তেনেহলে this debate is one primary debate within this entire discourse, that what should be the basis of human rights? Should it be natural law as it has evolved in the entire European context from Magna Carta to French Revolution and later developments in American War of Independence? Naturally, amar kisuman right ase boli jitu discourse koi, that because we are born as humans, we naturally have some inherent rights. Or should positive law be the basis of human rights, where not the inherent dignity of human existence or human being, but the will of the state would be the basis of human rights? Scholars like Amartya Sen argue that as long as morality is not considered and only the will of the state is taken as the basis of human rights will never be enforceable. Amartya Sen says that it is not possible to implement or enforce human rights through forceful agencies. The only way we can absolutely guarantee human rights is by moral implication. As long as people don't understand that human rights are inalienable, through some moral conduct, human rights cannot be guaranteed nor can it be enforced. So human rights therefore evolved out of the contradiction that exists between individuals and the state, individuals and the society. Individuals who cannot exist without the society, yet individuals that cannot sustain in a society that is too totalitarian in nature. So human rights নোহোৱাকৈ সেই কাৰণে আজিৰ এই ৰাজনৈতিক পটভূমিত আমি we cannot imagine a free existence in today's political scenario without the conception of human rights. এতিয়া কথাটো হৈছে গোটেই ডেভেলপমেণ্টবোৰ যে আমি চালো, এই গোটেই ডেভেলপমেণ্টবোৰ কিন্তু state specific. American Declaration of Rights happened for America, French Declaration happened for France, British developments happened in Britain. So all these are state-specific developments. When the world wars happened, বিশ্বযুদ্ধবোৰ যেতিয়া হ'ল, প্ৰথম বিশ্বযুদ্ধ আৰু দ্বিতীয় বিশ্বযুদ্ধ, when the world wars happened, world wars brought a new consciousness to people's minds. The havoc, the destruction, the loss of lives and property, the immense trauma that the world wars created led us to realize that the rights that are guaranteed within the states are not enough. এখন ৰাজ্যৰ ভিতৰত পোৱা অধিকাৰ আমাৰ বাবে সকলো সময়তে যথেষ্ট নহবও পাৰে. We need something more than that. We need rights that will surpass the institution of the state and will consider our rights not only as citizens but as human beings. Because what happens when individuals suppress our rights, then the states will intervene. When some institution or some organization suppresses our rights, the state will intervene. But what happens when the states themselves suppress the rights of individuals? What happens then? And therefore, the world wars and the atrocities of world wars led to the realization that something beyond the rights guaranteed by the state was required. And that realization is the birthplace, is the birth of the idea and the institution of human rights. গতিকে World War II World War I or পিছতো of course attempts asile. British writers like H.G. Wells kept on writing about the rights of men and the necessity to have codified rights for us as human beings. But these took concrete shape or long-lasting shape only after World War II, when the UN Charter was signed, as Professor Mohanto has already talked about. And the very first article of UN Charter stated that the purpose is to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights for fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. A UN Charter or a article to এটা নতুন discourse create কৰিলে, the discourse of human rights, that took concrete shape, of course, on 10th of December 1948, when United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Again, then in 1966, two important covenants, কারণ এইটো এটা declaration হে আছিলে, এটা declaration কৰিলে যে human rights আমাৰ আছে আৰু human rights আমাক লাগে. বেনথামে কোৱাৰ দৰে সেই ৰাইটছবোৰৰ যদি কংক্ৰিট কিবা codification নাথাকে, those rights will hardly be any meaningful political instrument for any individual in any state. আৰু সেইকাৰণে দুটা important covenant sign কৰা হৈছিলে, in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The second is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Both these covenants were signed in 1966 at Tehran, and they came into effect in 1976. আৰু একেলগে দুইটা covenantক Bill of Rights বুলি কোৱা হয়। আৰু এই গোটেই human rights-ৰ basis-টো এই international covenant কেইটাই বা Bill of Rights কেইখনে আমাক দিয়ে। And subsequently, many other covenants were signed on elimination of discrimination on race, discrimination of women, prohibition of torture, rights of children to be protected, and a বহু covenant sign হৈ আছে, and that's why the Human Rights Declaration or UDHR is a living document. That means it is constantly evolving, transforming, developing according to the needs of the changing political and social global scenario. এতিয়া এই basis to a foundation to লৈ আমি কিছুমান intricacy discuss কৰিম. The intricacies that are there in this very idea and institution of human rights that we get as humans, rights that we get as humans, rights that evolve or emanated from this very conflict between individual and society, individual and state. One cannot survive without the other, yet the state's growing power questions the very existence of individuals or humans. যে কনফ্লিক্টটো, এই যে এসেন্সটো হিউমেন ৰাইটছ ইনষ্টিটিউচনটোৰ, আমি যে মানৱ হিচাপে অধিকাৰ খুজিব বা অধিকাৰ কিছুমান লিখি উলিয়াবলগীয়া হ'ল, সেইটোৱেই that itself is actually a very interesting development. That why did we have to do this? We had to do this because there were clear violations, and if there were violations that had to be then rebutted with certain rights that went beyond the institution of the states. এতিয়া আমি intricacies লৈ আহো. The intricacies of human rights, I would like to categorize the intricacies into three parts. The first is regarding what rights, the second regarding whose rights, and the third regarding the nature of rights. প্ৰথমটো হৈছে কি অধিকাৰ? What rights are we talking about? The first intricacy or the first complexity of human rights arises from human rights itself. তো আমি কি অধিকাৰ, কোনবোৰ অধিকাৰক আমি মানৱ অধিকাৰ বুলি কওঁ? Now, Vasek identifies 3 generations of rights. 3টা generation তেওঁ identify কৰে. প্ৰথম generation টো হ'ল civil and political rights. The second generation is social, economic, and cultural rights. The third generation, that is the more recent generation of human rights, is talks about rights that protect human values from rapidly evolving international transformations like the development infrastructure, climate change, environment. এইবোৰৰ বাবে যিবোৰ আমাৰ এই ডেভেলপমেন্টবোৰৰ কাৰণে যিবোৰ অধিকাৰৰ দমন হয়, সেই অধিকাৰবোৰলৈ এটা নতুন জেনেৰেশ্যন ৰাইটছৰ ক্ৰিয়েট কৰা হৈছিলে. So the first generation civil and political rights were the least controversial of all, because most states, including US and Britain, very easily adopted the declaration, these covenants that included civil and political rights, like right against arbitrary arrest, right to have political opinion, and so on. It is social, economic, or cultural rights for all of this problematic, because social rights will mean, and these are more positive rights, because these are rights that we do not get against the state, but we get with the state. So social, political, cultural rights বুলি কোৱাৰ লগে লগে আমি কিছুমান social equality aspect recognize কৰিবলগীয়া হয়. Aspects that not the people in power or the people controlling the economic and political institutions do not very like or are not very interested in. তাৰপিছত third generation to human values protect কৰাৰ, যে যদি কিবা dam construction হৈছে, now dams are being constructed everywhere, so dam constructionত যদি কিবা human rights suppress কৰা হৈছে, how do we then assert that? So the first intricacy comes when we talk about what kind of rights we are discussing. So as long as the enemy or the ones that are suppressing the rights are clear, the যুদ্ধৰ সময়ত human rights invoke কৰাটো easier, because the idea of an enemy party is very clearly outlined. Any kind of war, we talk about world wars, we talk about any kind of war, but during peace it is more difficult to identify where human rights are being suppressed and what institutions are suppressing them and for what reason. It is a developmental rights or G2 conflict that is a very difficult conflict to have an answer to, for example. Secondly, যেতিয়া আমি কি অধিকাৰৰ কথা কওঁ, the institution of state is immediately questioned. That when the state is the institution that is suppressing the rights, what do we do? Because in case of human rights, that is the institution that is mostly at fault, because in other case of violations, so we have fundamental rights that the state will give us protection for, but what happens when the states suppress or violate the fundamental rights? It was a pratham intricacy. The second intricacy is regarding the question of whose rights, kar odhikar, and this is even more interesting than the first one, as I found that. So প্ৰথম কথা হৈছে হিউমেন নেচাৰৰ বেচিছত আমি মানৱ হিচাপে জন্ম লোৱাৰ বাবে আমি কিছু অধিকাৰ পাওঁ, সেই অধিকাৰবোৰক আমি মানৱ অধিকাৰ বুলি কওঁ. So we get certain rights because we are born as humans. Now those rights are based on the idea of human dignity. তে আমাৰ human dignity protect কৰিবলৈ আমাক কিছু অধিকাৰ লাগে. But the problem is human nature, the concept of human nature is too diverse to have any coherent generalization. ইমানেই বেছি diverse যে আমি এটা universal generalization কেতিয়াও human natureৰ কৰিব নোৱাৰো. আৰু যদি human natureৰে আমি generalization কৰিব নোৱাৰো, তেনেহলে আমি হিউমেন ৰাইটছৰ এটা ইউনিভাৰ্চেলাইজ বা জেনেৰেলাইজ পাৰ্সপেক্টিভ কেনেকৈ আনিব পাৰিম so how can we create human rights as a universal body of rights or universal conception if the very basis of those human rights, that is human nature and human dignity, is too complex to have any universal generalization. Secondly, the concept of interest. The human interest protect koriboloi amak human rights lage. But what if that those interests have no coherent definition or generalization? Because interests are never formed in a vacuum. Interests are always formed in a political, in a social, in a cultural context. And this, after postmodernism, after post-structuralism, the idea that human interests are fixed is no more a valid or is no more a very sustainable argument in social sciences. Gotiye human interest pur dependent hoy. Kihor upor dependent on cultural values, dependent on economic context, dependent on social and political context. So if human interests are dependent on social, cultural, and political context, how can human rights be universal in character and be beyond any cultural distinction? গতিকে আমি কাৰ অধিকাৰ বুলি কওঁতে অকল ইণ্ডিভিজুৱেলছৰ অধিকাৰৰ কথা কেনেকৈ কম? How can individuals be the only category that have rights on a universal scale? What do we do with culture then? What do we do with ethnic identities then? What do we do with indigenous identities then? Because if we recognize all individuals as equal and give them some fundamental rights, what happens to the inherent inequality that exists amongst us? Indigenous communities all across the world, for example, have been in a receiving position, have been in a suppressed position through colonial to post-colonial times. Jodi ami hokoloke saman koru, hei hierarchy buror ki hobo? Why should not communities have any rights? So why should the individual, the idea of liberal, rational individual dominate the entire discourse of human rights? Third intricacy in this part of the discussion about whose rights are we talking about is also about the human centrism of our discourses. Ami manav kendrik eta dharana ei samaj khonor ei prithibhi khonore loi hodai ahi asu je manobei pradhan, manobei ekomatro jibo jak odhikar lage ba jar porjabekhon ba jak jiai thokar babe ei samalbur lage. But this human centricism has been increasingly critiqued now in social sciences. If we only talk and think about humans, what happens to animals then? What happens to animal rights? Doesn't this earth belong to other living beings as much as humans? So why should only humans have rights? Why should not the non-human living beings have rights when we consider global and international rights? There is a very burgeoning literature and very complex body of literature that is coming up in this against this human centricism of our thought process, of our institutions, and that is actually harming this planet altogether. This human centricism, this obsession with humans and human development and human lives have led to a complete disregard of any other aspect of our overall ecology and environment. Environmentalists including have been critiquing this human centricism. Now I come to the third. I wanted to have 45 minutes to speak today, and I will try to be busy. That I want to talk about today is regarding the nature of rights. So what rights, whose rights, and what kind of rights are we talking about? First, the nature of rights when we talk about UDHR or human rights, it is universal in nature. So universal কোৱাৰ লগে লগে আমি এটা ধৰণৰ বস্তুকে universal category বুলি usually লওঁ. Usually people in power, usually ideas in power are the ideas that become generalized. In our imagination of nations, in our imagination of universality, এই সকলোবোৰতে কি হয় এটা সদায় power play থাকে. That is the people, the communities, the civilizations, the cultures that will be in power or that will be closer to the centers of power will dominate as the universal categories. গতিকে আমি universal right বুলি যিবোৰ right আচলতে assert কৰো, the rights that we assert as universal rights come very close to the Western conception of rights of people. Now, when that happens, we completely disregard the other conceptions of rights and existence of societies, of cultures that exist all across the world. So, universal word lage lage universal buli kwar lage lage eta bostu power center bu Western countries are situated work on it, that automatically becomes Western oriented. Now, that does not mean that universal human rights lose its relevance or lose its importance in the political scenario. Kintu jetia ami basic human nature ba interest basis of hey rights pur universalize koru, amar osor ekebare keitaman right he thakibo, keitaman odhikar he thaki jaboge. Sali jari saute amar osor khub keitaman right অধিকাৰ বাকি থাকিবগে, because everything else will be then specific to certain cultures. The second difficulty when we consider the nature of rights is that the entire idea of human rights came when the conflict rose between individual and the states. Because as long as conflict was between individual and individual, state was there as the referee. Problem to tetia hol jetia referee jon nije he suppression of involved hoi. Then we needed a universal a body that surpasses the state. Aru he surpass korar loge loge ki hoy sovereignty institution to question kora hoy. Now, questioning the sovereignty of state for protection of the rights of people, of humans, of their basic dignity, of their basic survival is very well accepted. Hetu ami accept koribo paro. But the global politics is not without the power politics, is not without hierarchy. Amar international politics to eta hierarchy ase where there are centers of power. গতিকে যেতিয়া state sovereignty to challenge হয়, then the states become vulnerable for attacks, vulnerable for intervention by outside forces. He vulnerability to UN charter হে কৰিছিলে যে আমাৰ সকলোৰে এটা sovereign right থাকে. Theory of sovereignty establishes that. Theory of territorial non-aggression establishes that. কোনো এখন ষ্টেটৰ বাকি এখন ষ্টেটত ইন্টাৰফিয়াৰ কৰাৰ অধিকাৰ থাকিব নোৱাৰে. But human rights discourse changed that, because human rights says that if there is a violation of human rights or a grave violation of human rights on the part of the state, then the international community will have right to intervene in the internal matters of that state. Problem to Holze, because the global politics is a power politics, is there is clear hierarchy, there are clear states that have power at their hands. This can become a pretext of intervening in the internal politics of the different sovereign states. So humanitarian intervention puli ko ami hetu. So humanitarian interventions happen when a group of a state or a group of states intervene in the internal matter of another state on the pretext of the violation of human rights. Or then if human rights get translated into human intervention, then again it becomes simply a politics of power rather than rather than the protection of the basic human rights or human dignity of the people concerned. So with these intricacies, we also therefore have to maybe go further than what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights carries for us, and think in terms that could be new to this discourse. Maybe think in terms of communities, and think in terms of groups. Maybe think in terms of discourses that go beyond the human centricism, that take the larger environment and ecology into consideration, for example. Now, the final section of my discussion today brings me to talking the relevance, that in spite of the intricacies that are inherent in the discourse of human rights, there is also relevance of human rights. যেতিয়ালৈকে এই ব্যক্তি আৰু সমাজৰ সংঘৰ্ষটো হৈ থাকিব, সেই সংঘৰ্ষটো হৈ থকাৰ লৈকে আমাক হিউমেন ৰাইটস লাগে। কিন্তু হিউমেন ৰাইটস কি ফৰ্মত লাগে, কেনেকৈ লাগে, তাৰ ফৰ্ম এটাই হ'ব নে বেলেগ বেলেগ হ'ব? These are questions that are extremely relevant for us to consider when we discuss human rights. So basic facts are still there, that the world is still divided into territorial units, territorial political units called states. Those states are sovereign, and since they have sovereignty, they have a claim to use force that no other institution has, a legitimate claim to use force. Tar mane state or hatot hodai extraneous power thake, power thakile citizens or rights violate war chance hodai thake. As long as this conflict will exist, the need for human rights will also continue to exist. Then again, an example, when World War II ended, two tribunals were created, the Nuremberg Tribunal and the Tokyo Tribunal. A tribunal bur create kora hoisile war crimes bur saboloi aru heibur opor judgment diboloi. So allied powers, the victors, the allied powers created the Nuremberg Tribunal to look into the war crimes that the defeated countries had perpetrated. বহু দীঘলীয়া trials হল, বহু detailed case hearings হল, আৰু তাৰ পিছত judgments দিয়া হল. Few people were sentenced to death, few people were sentenced for life. However, the interesting thing about Nuremberg Tribunal is, actually there are two interesting things about the Nuremberg Tribunal that was constituted after World War II. World War II শেষ হয়, এটা পাৰ্টি জিকিছে, এটা পাৰ্টি হাৰিছে, যিটো পাৰ্টি জিকিছে সেইটোৱে এটা ট্ৰাইব্যুনেল, দুটা ট্ৰাইব্যুনেল, টকিঅ' আৰু নাৰেমবাৰ্গ, জাৰ্মানী এণ্ড জাপান, ইনষ্টিটিউট কৰিছে যাতে যুদ্ধৰ সময়ত হোৱা ক্ৰাইমবোৰক তেওঁলোকে চাব পাৰে বা পানিছ কৰিব পাৰে. The two interesting things were that the victors kept themselves outside the scope of the tribunal. গতিকে only the losing parties were heard of in the Nuremberg trials. The victors and their crimes were never judged in the Nuremberg trials. কাৰণ তেওঁলোকে যুদ্ধখন জিকিছিলে, তেওঁলোকে নিজকে সেই entire tribunal processটোৰ পৰা বাহিৰত ৰাখিলে. The second interesting thing is, crimes against humanity were considered only as long as they happened during the times of war. যুদ্ধৰ সময়ত হোৱা war crimes burhe teoloke consider korile. They did not consider the crimes that happened against humanity during the time of peace. Why didn't they do that? They didn't do that because if they had considered the crimes that happened against humanity during the time of peace, the entire European statehood would go into prisons. Karon gotei colonial structure to asile against the very dignity of human beings. গতিকে colonialism বা racialism এইবোৰৰ কাৰণে হোৱা crimes বোৰ তেওঁলোকে consider নকৰিলে. So again, see, this is power. So power is there to be very careful about what kind of rights we are talking about. So with this, I will like to come towards the conclusion with a small excerpt from one of the leading scholars and thinkers and writers of our time. Chomsky in 1979 writes, or actually he gives an interview in 1979. This is an excerpt of that interview. He writes, "I think that the only way in which more humane policies can be imposed on the government, on the great powers, is by mass popular movements by their citizens. The peace movement was one of the factors that forced the US to restrain what would otherwise have been a much more intensive assault against Vietnam. The civil rights movement caused American power to make moves that ameliorated the situation of oppressed minorities. That is the way to press power towards human rights concerns. There is no other way." Thank you.
Thanks a lot, ma'am, for your wonderful deliberation. You have brilliantly highlighted the trajectory of the development of human rights. And apart from that, you have also pointed out the intricacies of human rights in a very lucid manner, intelligible to all. And I'm quite sure that your deliberation will definitely provide food for thought to all the participants. Now, the floor of the webinar is open for discussion. And I can also see our principal sir is online. Sir, if you want to share any thoughts on the webinar, please. Or any other participants for that matter.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I have already delivered my speech, and I would like to offer my sincere thanks to the resource person, Dr. Rimon Bhuiyan Gogoi. She has elaborately presented about human rights, the origin, the status, the present status in the present day socio-political context, and she referred to the natural law theory, refers to Hobbes, Kant, everyone, Karel Vasak. She mentioned about regeneration right. She told about she rightly told about the intricacies, the conflict between individual and the society, the enjoyment of right. So I think this is a very nice presentation, excellent presentation. I hope our students as well as our teachers will be mostly benefited by her presentation. And I think I should invite her for an offline presentation also to the college, so that our students can be more they will be more benefited by her presentation, I think.
I would really like
you can take an
to
initiative.
come and see your
Yes,
college.
definitely. Yes. Please come. And we have our PG also. We have PG students also. I think that initiative would be beneficial for our undergraduate students as well as our postgraduate student. I think, Zubaraz, you can take an initiative to organize an offline presentation from Dr. Rimon Bhuiyan Gogoi.
Sure,
I once again
sure.
would like to thank Rimon Bhuiyan Gogoi. And if any observation, any comment, any queries from our students or teachers, they can ask, they can raise their queries or comment or any observation. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your thoughts. Now, to the participants, if they have any questions, please share your thoughts. Okay, it seems they don't have at the moment, but definitely they will share in the future or subsequently. Now I request HOD Department of Political Science, Korga Palace, Dr. Pawan Kumar Gogoi sir, to offer a vote of thanks to all concerned. Sir, to you. Thank you.
ধন্যবাদ যুৱৰাজ, থেংক ইউ। আমি ইমান সময় প্ৰায় এঘণ্টা সময় ৰিমন মেমৰ যিখিনি হিউমেন ৰাইটছ ৰেলিভেন্স এণ্ড ইণ্টাৰেষ্টৰ ওপৰত যিখিনি তেওঁ বক্তব্য ৰাখিলে এইখিনি সম্পৰ্কে আমি শুনিলোঁ। আমি ইয়াৰ পৰা যথেষ্ট উপকৃত হৈছোঁ। আমি যিহেতুকে আণ্ডাৰ গ্ৰেজুৱেট ক্লাছ আৰু PG ক্লাছ দুইটাৰ লগত সম্পৰ্ক ৰাখোঁ, গতিকে আমাৰ কাৰণে এই ক্লাছটো যথেষ্ট উপযোগী হৈছে। আমাৰ PG ষ্টুডেণ্টবিলাক, আমাৰ টিচাৰ সকলো আমি ইয়াৰ দ্বাৰা উপকৃত হৈছোঁ। গতিকে মই ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ ৰিমন মেমক। ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ অধ্যক্ষ ডক্টৰ সৰ্বাশী মহন্ত ডাঙৰীয়াকো আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ, কৃতজ্ঞতা প্ৰকাশ কৰিছোঁ তেওঁ আমাৰ এই ৱেবিনাৰখন উদ্বোধনী কৰাৰ বাবে, ইনগ্ৰেট কৰাৰ বাবে। গতিকে তেখেতক আমি ধন্যবাদ এইটো কাৰণে জনাইছোঁ, তেখেতৰ উদ্বোধনী ভাষণতে হিউমেন ৰাইটছৰ ডেভেলপমেণ্ট সম্পৰ্কে, হিউমেন ৰাইটছৰ ডেভেলপমেণ্ট, ৰেলিভেন্স আৰু ইয়াৰ বিভিন্ন ধৰণৰ অসুবিধাবিলাকৰ বিষয়ে আৰু প্ৰেজেণ্ট যিটো আমাৰ হিউমেন ৰাইটছ ভায়লেশ্যন হৈ আছে এইবিলাকৰ ওপৰত যিখিনি তেওঁ বক্তব্য আগবঢ়ালে তাৰ বাবে তেখেতক আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ। ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ উপাধ্যক্ষ ডক্টৰ ৰীনা সন্দিকৈ বাইদেউকো আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ। তেখেতে আমাৰ আহ্বানৰ প্ৰতি সঁহাৰি জনাই তেখেতে আমাৰ অনুষ্ঠানটোত উপস্থিত থাকি আমাক উপকৃত কৰিলে, উৎসাহিত কৰিলে, তাৰ বাবে তেখেতক আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ। ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি আকৌ পুনৰবাৰ ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ। আমি ইতিমধ্যে ৰিমন ভূঞা গগৈ মেমৰ লগত আমি আমি যোগাযোগ কৰিছিলোঁ এই সম্পৰ্কত, আজি দিনটোৰ সম্পৰ্কত। তেখেতে আমাক একেষাৰে কথা দিছিল যে আমি এই অনুষ্ঠানটো তেখেতে এজন সমল ব্যক্তি হিচাপে উপস্থিত থাকি আমাক উপকৃত কৰিব। আমি যিহেতুকে ভাবিছিলোঁ যে অফলাইন আমি পাতিব পাৰিম নেকি, কিন্তু আমাৰ দুৰ্ভাগ্য হ'ল যে আজি আমাৰ দেওবাৰ হোৱাৰ কাৰণে, যিহেতুকে আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয় বন্ধ থাকিব, আমাৰ সকলোবিলাক শিক্ষানুষ্ঠানবিলাক বন্ধ থাকে, গতিকে সেইকাৰণে আমি ভাবিলোঁ যে ভাৰ্চুৱেল এখন মিটিঙৰ যোগেদি আমি আমাৰ তেখেতৰ যিখিনি ধাৰণা আছে ধাৰণাবিলাক আমি সকলোৱে শুনিম, তাৰ পৰা উপকৃত হ'ম। গতিকে পুনৰবাৰ মই ৰিমন ভূঞা মেমক আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ। ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ IQAC কোঅৰ্ডিনেটৰ ডক্টৰ সুৰজিত শইকীয়া ডাঙৰীয়াক। তেখেতে এই অনুষ্ঠানটো আৰম্ভণিৰ পৰাই আমাক যথেষ্ট উৎসাহিত কৰিছে। তেখেতে আজি জুমৰ যিটো লিংক, সেই লিংক তেওঁ বনাইছে আৰু আমাক এই অনুষ্ঠানটো অনুষ্ঠিত কৰাৰ বাবে যিখিনি সহায় কৰিছে তাৰ বাবে তেখেতক আমি নথৈ ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ। ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ, অৰ্থাৎ আমাৰ সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ লগত গড়গাঁও মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ এটা কলাবৰেশ্যন আছে। গতিকে তেখেতলোককো আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ। তেখেতলোকৰ কিছু সংখ্যক শিক্ষক আৰু ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰী ইয়াত উপস্থিত থাকি আমাক এই অনুষ্ঠানটোক সফলভাৱে সমাপ্তি ঘটোৱাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত সহায় কৰিলে, তাৰ বাবে তেওঁলোকক ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ। ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ শিক্ষক শিক্ষয়িত্ৰীসকলক। তেখেতলোকে আজি বন্ধৰ দিনটোতো এই অনুষ্ঠানটো উপস্থিত থাকি আমাক উপকৃত কৰাৰ বাবে তেখেতলোকক আমি নথৈ ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ, কৃতজ্ঞতা জনাইছোঁ। আৰু লগে লগে আমি আটাইতকৈ বেছি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ আমাৰ ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকলক, যিহেতুকে এতিয়া পৰীক্ষাৰ বতৰ, PG পৰীক্ষাবিলাকো চলি আছে, লগে লগে UG পৰীক্ষাবিলাকো চলি আছে। সেই পৰীক্ষাৰ মাজতে ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকলে অকণমান সময় উলিয়াই আজি এই অনুষ্ঠানটোত উপস্থিত থাকি আমাক উপকৃত কৰিলে, গতিকে তেখেতলোকক আমি বিশেষভাৱে ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ। আৰু ইয়াৰ তাৰোপৰি একেবাৰে শেষত আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ আমাৰ যুৱৰাজ গগৈ ডাঙৰীয়াক। যুৱৰাজ গগৈ আজি আবেলি সময়ত বিভিন্ন কামত ব্যস্ত থকাৰ কাৰণে মই পাহৰিয়ে গৈছিলোঁ। যুৱৰাজ গগৈক মই আজি অনুষ্ঠানটো হাত ধৰিবৰ কাৰণে তেখেতক আহ্বান জনাওঁ। তেখেতে এই অনুষ্ঠানটো আগভাগ ধৰিলে, গতিকে তেখেতক মই ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ। আৰু গতিকে এই অনুষ্ঠানটো সফলভাৱে ৰূপায়ণ হোৱাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত যিসকলৰ নাম মই ল'ব পাহৰিছোঁ বা লোৱা নাই, তেখেতলোককো মই ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ, যাতে আৰু মানে যদি মই অজানিত যদি থাকি গৈছে তেওঁলোককো মই ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ আৰু মোৰ ধন্যবাদৰ যিখিনি বক্তব্য সেইখিনি ইমানতে সামৰণি মাৰিছোঁ এতিয়া যুৱৰাজ গগৈৰ ওচৰলৈ আকৌ মই ঘূৰি যাব বিচাৰিছোঁ ধন্যবাদ
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your vote of thanks. So thank you everyone for joining us. So with this, the webinar comes to an end. Thank you.